all all the webinars are mostly talking about multilingual learners and literacy. Today's presentation is mostly about foundational literacy skills, so kind of phonological awareness and phonics and multilingual learners. And I want to kind of talk about some things, and then I kind of want to get some discussion. I'd love to hear from people who are attending live to tell us how did they see this in their classrooms or with their students, or what was their understanding of this. So please don't hesitate to chime. I'll have a couple stopping points where I ask you guys for kind of to share your thinking, but certainly if you want to interrupt at any time, no big deal. Um, let's get started. I'm Rob, and I'm at the St. Louis RPDC, and RPDC is a regional professional development center. There's like 9 RPDCs around the state. 5 of the RPDCs have EL consultants, and we're called the MEL team. So MEL is Missouri Migrant and English Language Learning. And again, I'm Rob. I'm from St. Louis. The St. Louis RPDC is part of a bigger organization called Education Plus. And if I've recognized a few names in the room, so good to see those people. And if I haven't met you, feel free to email me. If you have any questions, feel free to email. Great thing about us is we're grant funded. We're a free resource to public schools. I can come out if you're in my region, easy for me to come out to your school and meet with you, meet with teachers. Certainly could answer emails or jump on a Zoom call. And again, there's 5 of us around the state, so probably towards the end we'll share about all the other people. Anyway, I'm gonna share today's presentation. If you give me a second, I'll put this in the link in the chat real quick.
It's in the note taker.
Oh, is it?
Yes, so if they're signing in, they have access to it there.
All right. Well, I set up in the chat, so now I have to do it.
Okay.
All right. There we go. So that's today's slide deck. Feel free to write it down, take a picture of it, pull it up, whatever you feel like. Also, as Cami just said, it's in our note taker. So if you find like any of this information is interesting, or you kind of you remember me saying it, but you couldn't remember exactly what that was, please feel free to refer back to the slide deck. Also, I try to link some things in the slides that maybe are resources for later. All right. We just got a quick hour session. We're going to talk really quickly about kind of what is science of reading. We're going to talk about phonological awareness, and in particular, considerations and strategies for when we're working on phonological awareness skills with our multilingual learners. We're going to talk about decoding. We're going to go over the 3 cueing system a little bit and talk about pictures and when we want our students using pictures, and when is it maybe better to be a little bit more strategic about when we're using the pictures. And then this doesn't quite fit under the word recognition part of reading, but I'm going to do a little piece on vocabulary also. That's the plan. All right. So here's the deal. I put this together before everybody in the whole world went through letters. And so this used to be very interesting to people, but now I feel like many people are pretty familiar with this. But mostly this slide is just saying the science of reading is not just one thing. It's also not something you do. You don't do the science of reading. You do practices that align with the science of reading. So the science of reading is research that comes from lots of different fields: psychology, neuroscience, education, linguistics, and is all about how do individuals learn how to read. So a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research. there's a kind of a misconception that the science of reading does not include research on multilingual learners, and that's not completely correct. So there is significant research on how multilingual learners learn to read in English. Um, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. However, it is to be noted that this is an area that's lacking. There's less research on how multilingual learners learn to read in English. Um, and it's also not always front and center with the research. It's sometimes kind of an afterthought of, oh yeah, and also with multilingual learners, it might be like this versus the multilingual learners being the sole topic of maybe the research. So does include research, including multilingual learners. However, not as much research as we might find with native English speaking students. Um, so a big kind of takeaway from science of reading is this need for instruction that is systematic, explicit, and research validated. And I think it's kind of useful to talk about what these words mean. So if you're doing instruction that's systematic, you have a really clear scope and sequence. Um, so you're trying to ensure, hey, what are the very first skills that kids will need? Let's start there, and then once they have those skills, what skills make sense as the next step? And when you're being systematic, there's not going to be times where you're skipping things and creating gaps in knowledge, but you've thought it through. You have a good scope and sequence. I think I say kind of like the blueprint for a house, like a blueprint for a house. So if I'm being systematic, I've really thought it out. In fact, I'm gonna do corny stuff like this, and you're going to say systematic with a hand gesture, and it's going to be this. We're going to go like this, 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 this. Okay, everybody go systematic. I'm gonna pretend like you're saying that. Systematic. All right, cool. Um, Second thing, we want explicit instruction. So leaving no room for confusion or doubt. We want to be very clear about, hey, this particular rule for decoding words is when there's an E at the end of the word, it's making this previous vowel say its name or makes a long vowel. I'm going to be very explicit about what this rule is. For vocabulary, we're being very explicit about, hey, there's multiple meanings of this word. In this particular text, the meaning of the word is whatever. And so being really clear about rules, about meanings, and trying to do less of the sort of inductive learning or using context clues or hoping kids catch on to a rule and being more clear about, hey, this is exactly how it is. Um, so explicit, we're going to kind of point really clearly at our hand. We're going to say explicit. Everybody say explicit. Good job. Now say systematic. Now say explicit. All right. I know everyone's playing along. Thanks. All right. Last one is we want our instruction to be research validated. So basically, we want to know that the things we're doing in the classroom, people have looked at the results that these particular techniques um, lead to, and it is for sure going to lead to achievement and learning. So not just kind of like, hey, I found this cute activity on Teachers Pay Teachers and I'm just going to do it. And I'm not sure if, it just looked really cute and I wanted to do it. I'm not saying that's like always terrible. I'm not saying never you do that, but I'm just saying what science of reading says is we haven't had enough of systematic instruction, explicit instruction, and practices that are for sure research validated that lead to results. And so these are the things we're looking for solid literacy instruction. So research validated, we're just going to do a check. Everybody say research validated, say systematic, and say explicit. All right. And that's called TPR, actually. That's a EL kind of strategy, sort of using gestures to remember vocabulary words. All right. Some things I think are important from the research included in Science of Reading that I think are especially important for when we work with multilingual learners. One is that a lot of the stuff that we do for our native English speaking students works with our multilingual learners. So they found that instruction in the five components of reading, so instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, text comprehension, all instruction in all these areas did have clear benefits for English learners. Um, we do so I think one thing there is just to say that like we have reading interventionists in our school. They have skills in reading instruction, and a lot of the skills that they have in instruction would also be things that are beneficial for our English learners. And so if your school is saying like, hey, this particular English learner can't go with a reading interventionist and can only go with the EL teacher, I would kind of question that. I would say, hey, there's some things that the EL teacher maybe is going to be more skilled at, but if it's coming to some of these literacy skills, I do believe that the reading interventionist is just as qualified to give that instruction to these students. Um, let's go on. We are going to talk about considerations, and that things do need to be tailored for our multilingual learners. Um, I think something I'm going to get into a little bit is kind of if we're talking about the sounds we hear in words, or how many sounds we hear in a words, or producing different sounds in English, being aware of like, hey, what was the student's first language, and what sounds are present in the student's first language versus present in English, and do we need to do more practice with certain sounds because it's challenging for them to produce those sounds or to hear those sounds? Are there other sounds that maybe overlap that we know they'll have quick success with? Also getting into this sort of funds of knowledge. What do we know about our multilingual learners? Um, what are sort of practices they have in their homes, or maybe things that are more culturally relevant to them or interesting to people from their particular background or language group? Trying to tailor things. I think the culturally relevant pieces is important, sort of thinking about, hey, do the things that we're reading in class, can our students connect with them? Are these things that they've experienced or that they've seen in the world? And it doesn't always have to be the case, but certainly if all of my schooling were reading about books about experiences that I've never had, that would be a difficult thing to have success with. So really kind of trying to tailor it to be like, hey, I have diverse students in my classroom with diverse experiences, and I want to be reading texts that they can connect with. Um, and then really needing a lot, our English learners need a lot more oral language practice. So practice with vocabulary, with listening comprehension, with syntax or grammar. So really kind of knowing like, hey, the words that are in the student's oral language, um, basically what I can say, I can write, what I can listen to, I can later read, and sort of kind of trying to make those connections of if we can do things through listening and speaking, then we're later going to be more successful when we're trying to read and write. Um, all right. These are sort of some misconceptions I think that are important to clear up. Um, one is that advancing your ability to read in your first language or developing literacy in the first language is going to lead to success with reading in a second language. So we should always be talking to parents about it's great to be reading books at home in whatever language. And if you're reading books in English, great. If you have books in your home language and you want to read those books, that's also great, and we want that. And sometimes schools can even be super cool and provide books to families saying, oh, hey, we know that you guys speak Vietnamese. We actually found some children's books in Vietnamese. You're welcome to kind of take those home or something like that. So, kind of really always sending the message that we value literacy in all languages. We're trying to help your student to develop literacy in English, but we also hope that they'll develop literacy in their first language also. And we know that developing literacy in the first language usually results in higher levels of literacy in a second language. Um, And then second, sometimes teachers uh, feel like, oh, the student's being so confused by having all these different languages in their life. And so you know, sometimes we say, without knowing better, we maybe say things to parents like, hey, it'd be better if you just read in English at home, or if you just spoke English at home, or he just needs to only be speaking in English, or we shouldn't allow any home language in our classroom because it's going to confuse them. And so this research here is really saying, like, look, students have the capacity to learn multiple languages at once without jeopardizing either language. So we don't need to be worried about, hey, I don't want to get him confused by exposing him to text in Spanish while he's learning text in English. We want the opposite. We want to encourage literacy in either language. Again, it's great to have a goal of I want to help you develop literacy in English, but we don't need that goal to discourage another goal of developing literacy in the home language. All right. I said a lot there, and I know you're not going to share with a partner, but I wonder if I want you guys to just kind of think about any of that. First of all, like a lot of you guys maybe went through letters and you already knew a whole bunch of that. And so maybe someone wants to say, hey, I already knew this, but I think this is important because of whatever. Or maybe there was something I said that you didn't really quite know and you thought that was interesting and something that needs to be spread more, spread across buildings and classrooms. So I'm gonna give real quick opportunity if anybody feels brave and wants to unmute and share something, would love that. Or you can put it in the chat. All right. Well, look, guys, you're gonna make me feel like I'm talking to a brick wall here. Um, but that's okay. Um, we got something in the chat. Yeah, Dr. Tate, yeah. I could not agree more with how amazing being able to expose children to their home language and English is for students. Agreed. Ivy says, I think the point about encouraging reading in the first language is so important. Great. Yes. Excellent. Yeah. And so basically, if you ever overhear teachers kind of talking about, ooh, hey, I think it's better if they just practice reading in English or something like that. Just be like, ooh, hey, actually, we're going to work on reading in English in class, and that's great. And if at home, if it's easier to read some books in home language with mom and dad, we want that too. So kind of again, not to make anyone angry, but just to kind of be like, actually, I understand why you might think that. You might think that, ooh, that'd be confusing to hear multiple languages, but actually, turns out kids are able to do this. All right. All right, let's get into phonological awareness a little bit. First, this is the reading rope. Again, a couple years ago, people were all like, ooh, cool rope. I've never seen that. And now everyone's like, yeah, I've seen this a million times. Ooh, we got other stuff. It also helps them access and link all that background knowledge. Yes. Ooh. Yes, yes, yes. Ivy and Dr. Britt, well, Ivy, I think I'll talk a little bit about some book, at least one option for books. All right. This is the reading rope. There's something called the simple view of reading. It's basically saying you need two big kind of skills, not skills, two big families of skills in order to be a skilled reader. So you need language comprehension skills and you need word recognition skills. And you can't just have one. You have to have both in order to be a skilled reader. Um, these are finite. So you can eventually master decoding versus like you never really master vocabulary. You probably always encounter words that you kind of didn't quite know, right? Um, but essentially, what it is like if students are struggling with reading, it's probably one of these two things that's being the problem. Either they're lacking some language comprehension skills or they're lacking some word recognition skills. And so, kind of as we look at kids who are struggling with reading, we might think about why do we think they're having problems with reading? Are they struggling with reading because they don't have background knowledge about this topic? And so they're kind of reading words, but it doesn't make any sense to them because they've never heard of, Niagara Falls or whatever it is. Or maybe they don't have the vocabulary, so they're decoding, but they're not understanding what any of the words mean. So it's a vocabulary issue. Um, or maybe they're struggling with reading because they don't know the letters and they don't know the letter sounds and they cannot decode. And so then it's like, hey, they actually do have great background knowledge about this topic and they know lots of words, but they come from a different alphabet or from a language that's making different sounds and they need instruction in how to decode in English. So always kind of thinking, hopefully, which of these two things seems to be the problem? And then this is Rob's like not completely vetted, approved point of view. Um, but I feel like it's correct. I would mostly think as a school, um, if the student is struggling with reading and we think it's mostly a word recognition issue, I mostly think that I would encourage help with a reading interventionist. So if I'm like, hey, Carlos is struggling with reading, and we figured out that he doesn't know his letters or his letter sounds and he's not able to decode, then I would say, hey, I think small group reading support or time with a reading interventionist would really benefit Carlos because he needs these skills and our reading interventionists know how to teach these. On the other hand, if Carlos can decode, but he's not having the background knowledge to really understand what he's reading, or he doesn't have the vocabulary to understand, or maybe uh, he's not understanding different genres of the text or grammar rules. That's sometimes like the EL teachers kind of like this stuff, right? We feel like, ooh, we're great at teaching vocabulary or teaching kind of the rules of language. And so it might be like if I think they're struggling with reading because of one of these skills, I might say, ooh, maybe we could do some more time with the EL teacher. So again, if I'm thinking word recognition, hey, it's not saying the EL teacher can't do word recognition skills. They can, we can, but there might be other people in your building that are just as skilled or more skilled in those areas. And so you might try to differentiate, is this something that ELD will really help with, or is this something that reading intervention might really help with? All right. I saw Lauren give me a little positive reinforcement there. This is, and then Cami, you just got to help me with the chat. If something in the chat is something I need to pay attention to, you tell me. All right. Science of Reading had a whole reading wars thing. And mostly, I think what it all stems from is, I don't know, I would say mostly like for purchase curricular resources, uh, maybe took aligned with Science of Reading and went a little bit too hard on the phonics piece. And so schools and teachers started to feel like, hey, it's feeling like we're spending a ton of time on phonics, on these foundational skills, and we're not doing much of why is reading fun and what are the different genres of books and thinking about the characters and it's more like drill and kill sort of skills. Um, and so a lot of the science of reading is kind of like, hey, science of reading is just all about phonics, and this is just like this is not what kids need, or maybe they do need it, but then they grow up like not liking reading. And I just want to say, like, we just looked at the rope. Science of reading is saying all of these things, really. So in actuality, all the research would say you need all of these things. Um, the conflict about it was it feels too heavy on the phonics stuff. And then I just like this quote, Goldenberg. First of all, he's a hilarious guy if you ever get to hear him speak on like a podcast or something. But he's kind of like, look, think of it as a foundation of a building, right? If all I have is a foundation of my building, that's not very much. That's not going to be somewhere I want to live. On the other hand, I can't have a building at all without a foundation. So yes, I agree that phonics is not everything. Foundational skills is not everything, and I shouldn't have an ELA block that's all foundational skills. Um, but it certainly is important and it can't be skipped. And I think A lot of why we shifted towards science of reading was we weren't doing this systematically, we weren't doing it explicitly, and we're starting to get kids who got into upper grades and hadn't quite mastered decoding. All right. Um, all right, we're going to talk about sounds and phonology. So Guadalupe did session one, and she used this slide, but I'm just going to talk about it too anyway. Mostly I like it a lot. So this is this weird thing where babies can hear they can differentiate or distinguish between any phoneme that can potentially be created in language. So when you're a brand new baby and they did this weird thing, they put little, whatever nodes or whatever things on the kids' brains, and they're like playing two different sounds and seeing if they could like tell the difference between two different sounds. And they were incredible at it. So brand new babies are really good at hearing all these different types of sounds. But as babies start to get more and more input from their caregiver, often the parent's usually speaking just one language, maybe. And then the baby is saying, hey, these phonemes are going to be important in my life. These phonemes, someone's trying to talk to me, and I got to really pay attention to these phonemes. And so your brain starts to be like, hey, the need to differentiate the phonemes that come in these other languages, like this doesn't seem like something we're going to need right now. And so we kind of lose this ability to distinguish between all these other sounds, and we just focus our ability to hear the different sounds in the language of our caregiver. Um, and so, um, what this eventually is going to get to, I'm probably skipping here, is mostly that when we later try to learn another language, we get these sounds that sound uh, to native speakers sound like clearly two different sounds, but to speakers of another language can be like those sounds sound a whole lot alike, right? So, um, some examples of this are so Chinese speakers, there's the ra and the la sound. So kind of that RA and LA, ra la. And mostly you'll see it in real life. You'll see it kind of stereotypically in TV shows and stuff. And I feel like it's a little bit culturally insensitive, but it makes sense when you think a little bit about, hey, it's difficult to hear the difference between those sounds. So when a native Chinese speaker tries to say the word lobster, they might say robster or something, right? So they're substituting that R sound for the L sound. And it's just an innocent mistake that's happening because in their home language, those two sounds sound almost identical, right? So to try to make one sound versus the other to them is like, wow, I can't really hear if this is the right one or the wrong sound because those two, to me, those sounds sound so similar. In Spanish, I believe the sound in English that B makes and that V makes would be really difficult for Spanish speakers to differentiate between. So mostly I see this, I don't know, I had Spanish speaking parents in the school I worked with, and they would write out words for me. And I took Spanish as a class, so my literacy in Spanish was kind of better than my speaking Spanish. But I would see that they would spell something like I don't know, they would maybe like instead of ventana, which I know starts with a V because I learned it in Spanish as a foreign language, and so we saw the word. They would spell ventana with a B, ventana, right? Which phonologically would make sense to them, right? To me, I'm like, oh, that's wrong because I learned it in a book and it said ventana, but I'm pronouncing it like like a English speaking American saying ventana instead of a Spanish speaker might sound more like ventana, even though it's spelled with a V. So that those two sounds are just really, really similar in Spanish. And so it's hard for them to they're kind of guessing sometimes as far as like which sound the English speaker might be expecting. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Um, what do we got here? Uh, All right. Again, mostly just this slide just saying all languages have different phonemes, different amounts of phonemes. Um, and in English, we have 26 letters, but we have like 40, what is it, 44 phonemes. We have just five vowels, but they can make a variety of sounds. We have short vowels, we have long vowels, we have schwa sound, we have R controlled vowels. We have all kinds of different sounds that our vowels can make, which is different than even a language like Spanish, which uses mostly the same alphabet. They would have like maybe 27 letters, I guess, if you had Enye. Um, but they would have, so Spanish actually has fewer phonemes than letters, and English has way more phonemes than letters, right? So we have 44 phonemes and 26 letters. But in Spanish, if you're thinking that B and V are kind of the same phoneme, and maybe S and Z are sort of the same phoneme. Um, then for Spanish would be fewer phonemes than letters. Also in Spanish, those five vowels are always making the same sound. So really consistent vowel sounds versus English, which is pretty difficult with different types of vowel sounds. Um, all right. Um, what does all this mean? How do we help with all this? Mostly, kids need to hear the sounds of English or whatever language you're learning. You got to get familiar with the sounds. Both that I have to hear the sounds and also kind of like hearing the rhythm of how the language is spoken is sort of important. And one way we do this without even really knowing it is in early elementary, in preschool, in pre-K, in kindergarten, in first grade doing things like saying chants and nursery rhymes and songs can really expose us to all the different sounds of English and to sort of the rhythm of spoken English. Um, and so mostly I want to say that if these things are happening in early childhood, great. This is gonna help with phonological awareness later and literacy skills. Also, it exists in other languages. So other languages have nursery rhymes and chants and things, and likewise, those things help speakers of those languages be those kids become familiar with the sounds of their language. There's one in Spanish that I like that I used to use as a Spanish teacher that I can't remember all the words to, but it was like it's like mix the chocolate. Your nose is like a peanut. It doesn't make much sense, but it has all the different sounds. So it's like bate chocolate, tu nariz de cacahuate. But it's got all the different Spanish vowel sounds in it. It's got sort of the rhythm of the Spanish. And so that's the same sort of thing of like the more I'm saying this chant or this nursery rhyme, I'm becoming familiar with how do I produce these sounds. Um, and then when it comes time to identifying, hey, what's the first sound you're hearing in this word? Um, this is a skill called phonological awareness. And once you figure this out in your home language, you're able to figure out how to do it in other languages. Now, I think there's a little bit of nuance here where, like, all right, this is kind of my big thing is knowing the skill of how do I listen to a word and think about how many sounds did I just hear in that word? Can I segment the different sounds I hear in the word? Or can I hear a word and really think about what's the first sound versus what's the ending sound? That's this transferable skill we see here at the bottom of the slide. So if you figured out how to do that in your home language, you're going to be able to figure that out how to do that in another language. The tricky thing is trying to do this with words that you're totally unfamiliar with. So you need a little bit of when we have things in our oral language, they don't like escape our short-term memory. So if mostly like I'm not going to explain this very well, I think, but I'm going to try. If I were to say a word to you that you've never heard before in another language, it'd be really hard for you to think about that word and try to think about how many sounds are in that word or what's the first sound I heard in that word because it's in one ear out the other or it's like you just said that word and I don't know if I can even repeat that word. So mostly I think of like this Haggerty stuff where we're going through these skills and we're just saying a word and we're saying thorn. What's the first word you hear in thorn? And like if I'm new to English and I've never heard the word thorn before, I'm not picturing a thorn in my mind. I'm like, she said some word, and I don't exactly know what word she said. And she's asked me what the first sound is. I don't even remember what the word was she just said, right? So I would say one consideration is when we practice phonological awareness skills, identifying the first sound, how many sounds, what's the last sound, using words that we know kids are familiar with. Because if I say, what's the first sound in table, you can picture a table and you can say the word table and you can think about how many sounds do I hear in the word table. So using words that we're really familiar with allows us to really think about the sounds in a word, versus using words that maybe we've never heard before that are not in our vocabulary can make it really difficult. And I definitely skipped ahead because I think that comes later, but it's all right. When we get into these sounds that are like hard to distinguish, using mirrors and thinking about how our mouth is formed to produce that sound is important. So if kids are struggling with the b and the v sound and hearing the difference, really talking, looking at a mirror and hey, look how when I make the v sound, I'm kind of like got my teeth over my lip here, v, and when I have the b, I have the closed lips like b. And so when you can really focus on how do I form my lips to create that sound, it can also help them sort of distinguish between the two sounds. Um, all right. I'm gonna go through this piece and then I'll stop and let people talk if they have anything to say. Eventually, what we're getting at is when you have multilingual learners, you want to know what is their first language and what sounds are in their first language and what sounds are in English and how similar and different are these two languages. So if I'm a reading interventionist and I'm going to be practicing phonological awareness with a multilingual learner, I want to know what was this student's first language and then what in particular are sounds that are going to be challenging for this student. And also what are some sounds that they should be pretty able to generate. So you're kind of doing like what's called a phonemic contrastive analysis. Um, all right, this website takes you to information about different phonemes in different languages. It does use, I think, the IPA, which is the International Phonemic Alphabet. I always like to joke that it stands for India Pale Ale, but it doesn't, or it doesn't in this context. I like these charts here. For teachers, like these are the easy ones. Unfortunately, it's only English, Spanish, and Chinese and Arabic. So it's not going to have all languages. And when I talk about the contrastive analysis, I'm talking about this sort of Venn diagram here. So, hey, these are sounds exclusive to Spanish. These are sounds that are not present in Spanish and just in English. And then here are some sounds that overlap. The all Ohio charts look like this. And basically they don't use the IPA, so they're easier to read if you're not. The IPA are like these weird symbols here that honestly I don't know how to read. So like here we see the j sound. So jam or j at the end of a word, wage or giraffe. This j sound in Spanish, not so much, right? So we do have these sounds, but when we get to this j sound, hey, that's a sound we should practice with. And again, they have all different English Spanish, they got English Chinese. So again, if you're trying to figure out what are some sounds that this kid might have trouble with, this is the sort of document that might be helpful. Um, all right. I think she's going to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to skip this. On your own, you might watch her. She's basically talking about in Spanish, we don't have many words that start with j. And so when I do phonemic awareness practice, I'm gonna make practice for producing the j sound. So she's like, "Oh, I have the word pet. Let's turn p to j. Now what? Oh, I have jet." And then we're talking, oh, it's a jet, like I fly a jet. And she's also attaching meaning to the words. But she's strategically made each one, we're going to make a j sound because I know my Spanish speakers need a little extra practice with producing that sound. Um, all right. This is not exactly what I want you to share about because this is about um, the video, but open up if anyone wants to unmute or say anything about any of this, like, hey, never thought of that, or hey, I agree with that, or hey, Rob, I think you misspoke and you said this, and I don't know if that's totally correct. Um, Love to hear from anybody if you have any thoughts about what we just went over so far. Dr. Tate says no such thing as too much phonics instruction. Okay.
Are you going to share later our EL Steps to Success document that
I
has those
think,
charts?
I don't know. I think it might be linked on the last line.
Okay, so we did make some of those overlapping Venn diagrams that compare languages. So we have them for some of the most prominent languages here in Missouri. So those are available in that document.
Good.
That we'll put it in the note taker if it's not in the slides.
All right. Okay, Dr. Tate says share those. Dr. Tate, do you really believe there's no such thing as too much phonics instruction? Or are you joking around with us? I don't, it could be defensible. I don't know. I do. All right.
Oh, hold on, let me,
Are you in a room with
I'm
other
in a
people?
room with other people. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Hold on one second. I think you have to mute your sound. There you go.
If, if everyone else is muted, it should be okay. I have a great article for you. I'll try to share it in the chat. For me or for Dr. Tate?
I do. I think especially for our elementary MLs and even our native English speaking, I just think in these years, there's no such thing as too much phonics instruction, because I think it morphs into morphology and things like that. And so what falls under that umbrella is very, very big. So I do believe that there's just like, now, should you do it all the time? Absolutely not. But I think anyone with like a good head on their shoulders and knows what they're doing teaching phonics, there's just no too much.
Yeah. All right. So what you said, I agree with. I would say if my whole ELA block is phonics, if I don't go, if we don't ever do a read aloud for pledge or have even like independent reading for pledge, I think, and you said that yourself, basically that would not be, I mean, professional judgment, come on, we're not just going to do phonics for the whole book. But I do think, I mean, I think this whole thing is all about we started to embrace programs that did not emphasize explicit phonics instruction and assumed kids could kind of just figure out rules more than maybe they could, or encourage other ways of attacking an unknown word than maybe attending to the letters. And we got into a jam. It led to kids who got into upper grades and couldn't decode, and that was a problem. But yeah, to your point, I think you also said like, hey, obviously we're not doing it all the time, the only thing, but maybe no such thing as too much. Fair point. All right. Just want to, I think I'm just kind of talking about the need for oral language. So really, again, making sure that we're doing the big five, but then we're also doing a whole lot of listening to others and speaking with others and talking about what we're understanding. Um, Really goes a long way with all students and especially our multilingual learners. Um, some ideas. So this comes from a woman named Katie Topple, who I really think is great. And she talked about when she's doing phonemic awareness practice, where she's talking about how many sounds do I hear in a word, or what's the first sound I hear in a word, rather than using just any word. She sometimes uses words that she knows that kids have been hearing in their classroom. So she might talk about, hey, in this particular example, you guys in science have been talking about beavers, and you've been talking about the beaver makes a lodge, and that they have a tail. And so it's like, hey, let's practice some of our phonemic awareness skills or phonological awareness skills, and let's use some of these words. So again, rather than just selecting random words that I'm not sure if my students are familiar with, I'm going to use some words that I know they've been exposed to. So, hey, this is the beaver's lodge. How many sounds do you hear in the word lodge? So again, um, doing these skills where we're really talking about helping kids talk about what sounds they hear, what's a initial sound, what's a final sound, what's a middle sound, and how many sounds. But again, doing it with words that we know they've been exposed to, and hopefully are words that are in their vocabulary. She this is again Katie Topple strategy here. This is sort of these I just call them these like Haggerty drill sort of things, where typically in Haggerty, if you're familiar with Haggerty, it's a spiral bound sort of thing. You hold it, there's no visuals, and you're just kind of saying words to kids and having them repeat back what's the first sound. So I say, what's the first sound in punch? And they say, P. So um, she's basically saying you can do those same things. And I think that's good practice. And doing daily practice with that is beneficial. But for multilingual learners, you might consider doing some of these same prompts, but using a visual as an anchor as I do them. And so I'm gonna say, "Ooh, hey, I see a shovel. What's that first sound I hear in the word shovel?" And as I'm asking them, I'm pointing to the shovel in the picture, right? So they're getting this reinforcement about, oh, she's saying the word shovel. That's a shovel. Actually, I think I do remember hearing about a shovel, and now I can think about this word a little bit more clearly because I have a visual versus just hearing the word in the dark. Or again, I see a scarf. What sounds do you hear in the word scarf? Or I spy with my little eye a d, a, g. What word is that? And so kind of like using this visual anchor can be really, I mean, look, again, it would help a lot of students, and it's really, really helpful for our multilingual learners who, again, aren't always completely familiar with these words that they're being asked to keep in their brains and sort of think about metacognitively, I guess, or thinking about what sounds they're hearing. I said metacognitive. I don't know if that was the right way to use that word. I just wanted to use that word. Okay. Ooh, this is where my science of reading people are gonna really like get mad at me or something. Or anti-science of reading people. I don't know. There was just this was kind of painted as the bad guy in the reading wars. So the three queuing system is saying like, hey, when kids misread a word, they probably made a mistake. There's three types of mistake they might have made. And mostly what science of reading is saying is that when you encounter a word you don't know, we would encourage that kids attend to the letters and try to decode that word. And if they saw a letter and they mistook it for a different letter, or if they got two letters reversed, they thought it was, I don't know, TA and it was AT or something like that. That would be called a visual error. And again, aligned with science of reading people, mostly what they would say is the visual error is the error that we're not going to get too frustrated about. And we're basically going to say, hey, you were trying to decode, or you were at least looking at that word and trying to figure out the word. The other two are encountering a word, you don't know what the word is, and rather than attempting to really parse out what are the different letters and how could I decode this word, you're trying to think about, ooh, based on this story and based on the picture I see on a page, I think this is the word. So you're making an error with a word based on kind of this external clue versus just attending to the letters. And then structure also would be you're kind of taking a guess and you're kind of like, hey, based on what I know about English grammar and how sentences are formed, the next word in this sentence might be this word. So I'm going to guess this word. So I know like frequently we say, I don't know, whatever phrase, and so I'm going to just fill in with that word. Um, all the errors happen, and I don't necessarily want to say there's good errors, bad errors. I just want to say that when we encounter words we don't know, we want to encourage kids to attend to the letters. And so basically, your first attempt when trying to figure out an unknown word should be attending to the letters and trying to sound out the word. And it's not, I don't want to say like you should never encourage these other strategies. I'm just saying that when we have problems later in life, it might be that anytime I encountered a word I didn't know, I just looked for a picture so I could make a guess, And then eventually I got to a point where I didn't have any pictures or I'm reading complex text and I didn't have any way of kind of taking a guess at the word. And I never quite mastered these decoding skills that I really needed to. I think I said that in a pretty neutral way, but probably inevitably someone did not agree. Does someone not agree in the chat? It's okay. I think the issue is can turn into guessing. Yeah. Yeah, that agreed. Dr. Tate, yes. So anyway, we got all these posters. I don't even want to say you have to take all these down. I just want to say, like, I think trying to send a clear message of when we get a word we don't know, the very first thing we try to do is look at the letters and try to decode the word. So I think as long as you're trying to hit home over and over again, first strategy we have is attending to letters and trying to decode. Anyway, I'll move along a little bit. This is just saying exactly that if we don't figure out decoding, eventually we get into trouble. Text gets more and more complex. We have fewer and fewer clues about what these words might be. And so you get in trouble later. All right. I do like this video. We'll show this one because it's just funny and it makes me laugh every time.
Multilla.
What's the word?
Peanut butter.
Peanut butter. So again, I think that kind of portrays that sort of problem of I have background knowledge that this type of container might be peanut butter or something. And so instead of attending to letters or trying to decode a word, I'm going to take a guess at the word based on kind of background knowledge, which again is not always the end of the world, but too much of it, or we might get into this, find ourselves in upper grades where we haven't quite figured out how to decode words or how to attack a word using what we know from phonics. All right. How much time do I have, Cami? Good. I'm good. I got 20 minutes.
As much as you need, Rob.
All right. I like this. This is Katie Topple in the flesh. Well, not in the flesh, but she's going to talk about using pictures strategically. I love her ideas here. So I'm gonna play this video for you also. Were there any issues with the video? You could hear it? Yeah, good.
I want to talk next about decoding. So some notable statements about decoding that I think are important. Fluency in decoding supports comprehension. So when readers are fluent, that helps them understand what they're reading. Children naturally want to look at pictures and also predict words using context. So a major goal of decoding instruction is to instead focus on children using letters to decode words. And finally, children need to know a lot of words and their meaning to make sense of written language. So this year, I did a lot of thinking about pictures because there's a lot of talk about whether or not pictures are okay and if pictures make students guess. So I thought about different scenarios for using pictures in the context of being a language teacher. So often we see, and this is kind of a simple kindergarten example, a picture presented with the text, I can hop, and the icon is right there. So what might happen is a student uses the strategy to look at the picture, and likely they don't know the word hop, but they know the word jump. So they would say, I can jump. And that's misreading the text. It accurately represents what the picture shows, but if we're focusing on decoding, there is an error there. So another alternative is to present the text first so that the student is relying on the text and then show the picture. So that gives them the opportunity to focus on the text and decode, but then also the opportunity to learn a new word if they were not familiar with that word. They might learn hop, they might learn that hop is similar to jump, and that gives them an opportunity to learn language. The third is kind of the lens I use as a language teacher of using an image instead of a keyword. And in this instance, I'm really focusing on vocabulary. So I'm providing students with opportunities to decode words that they should be able to decode given their phonics instruction, but I'm leaving blank so that they can bring in their vocabulary knowledge and supply the word themselves. So in this instance, a student might say, I can jump, which could be correct, or they might say, I can hop, which also could be correct, but I can hear the difference in which word they know and which word they don't know. So these are different approaches, and we use them strategically for different purposes. Something we've started to do this year is give students a preview of words that are in their little decodable books. So rather than just dive into the text, we show them slides that look like this. B-A-G. Blend it, bag, and then it reveals the picture. And then the teacher says, oh, there's so many things I can put in my bag. I could put groceries in my bag. I could put toys in my bag. What could you put in your bag? And it gives them contextualized language around these words, so that then when they read the words in the text, they've seen a visual and they have an understanding. Another way is to provide the vocabulary approach. So here's a few example sentences we used when we were learning about weather and appropriate clothing. If it is sunny, then she could see with and the students would pick one of the three, sunglasses. If it is rainy, then he could get his rain boots. It was cloudy, so I got my umbrella. If it is cold, then I could get my hat. So a key learning I had this year was, don't repeat the same sentence over and over, because children tend to just memorize it and then they're not actually decoding. So we've intentionally altered the sentence a little bit each time and challenge them to really tune into what the words say, rather than just repeating the same thing. Like, I can get my hat, I can get my boots, I can get my mittens. It's more of a challenge. And if you'll notice, the sentence structure is complex. It's a cause and effect sentence, and it shifts every time, so that it's rich language. And students can also utilize different words. They could say if it is rainy or if it is raining, either one. But if I were to put that word raining in print, they wouldn't have the ability to decode it yet. And they might say rainy, even though the print said raining. So the use of pictures strategically means that they're supplying their vocabulary rather than misreading.
Okay. So that, again, her name is Katie Topple. She's really great. A lot of my stuff came from this webinar that's kind of mentioned down here at the bottom here. Again, she's kind of saying, like, look, if I really want them to see, can they decode, I might hold back the picture. I liked her idea. Basically, before we read our decodable, let's look at some of the words we're going to encounter. Let's preview these words. And then I'm just showing the letters. We're talking about the sounds. We're blending it together. And then I'm going to show you a picture, and it can kind of maybe reinforce, oh, bag, I did sound out bag, and now I see a bag. Or bag, and, ooh, now you're telling me what a bag is, because I wasn't quite sure. But either way, we're practicing the skills of, do you know this letter? Do you know the sound it creates? And when I have these three sounds and blend it, what word do I create, without just kind of guessing at a picture? And then I do like her other way of, sometimes I want to use the pictures, and then I can kind of see what vocabulary they know. And I like also her point about trying to avoid always doing these formulaic sentences where kids just start, I memorize the sentence frame or whatever it is, or the sentence pattern, and I'm not really looking at each individual. And lots of these are sight words, but it's kind of like, if I vary it, then I know they're at least attending to it and not just breezing through it because they just memorized something. And then I liked her slide, so I recreated her slide because I just liked it. And then the back. Again, I'm gonna say, if you want to unmute and share something, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, do those things make sense? Are you always already doing things like that? You can share in the chat. You can unmute if you want. Say like, hey, yeah, Rob, keep going. Let's talk about more stuff. Or, man, I wish this was over. I think the issue. All right, guys. I'm going to advance. All right. Guadalupe mentioned this in session 1. I just wanted to kind of revisit it again. I don't mostly just be aware that there's something called language distance, which would be kind of like how different is one language from another language. And in the United States, when we're talking about language distance, we're usually talking about how different is the language from English. And some languages share the same alphabet. So in an alphabetic writing system, each character represents a phoneme or a sound. So English, Spanish, Korean, Arabic, Swahili, Pashto, they all use alphabets like this where each character represents a sound. And again, sometimes it's very straightforward. Like, even if you don't speak Spanish, you can probably read Spanish because it's very phonetically spelled, I guess. There's not a lot of kind of exceptions to the phonics rules versus English, which has quite a bit of exceptions. But mostly I want to say, like, as a teacher, I had mostly Spanish, I had almost exclusively Spanish speaking English learners. I was at a school with a whole lot of Spanish speaking English learners. The community was a big Spanish speaking community. And so I didn't get many ELs with different writing systems or with literacy in languages outside of Spanish or English. But people who have literacy in Arabic, there's a directionality difference there, right? So they would read from right to left versus in English is left to right, and that's a big thing to keep in mind and to know, like, it's going to take a little bit longer for this student to learn literacy in English because it's a brand new alphabet to them and the directionality is quite a bit different. On top of this, there's other alphabets that are not each symbol represents a sound, but each character might represent a whole syllable. So that would be a syllabic alphabet or a syllabic writing system. And logographic would be each character represents maybe a whole word or a whole concept. And so that's a huge difference, right? So that's like, hey, in my previous writing system, if I wanted to write the word dog, I just made this character, and it wasn't about hearing each of the different sounds and having a character for each sound. It was about I knew this one character represented this one word. So that's a big change too. So I think just keeping in mind that, hey, knowing about my multilingual learners, what is their first language? Do they have literacy skills in that first language? If they have literacy skills, how similar or different is their writing system to the writing system that they're going to be using in English? And just keeping those in mind and adjusting sort of expectations a little bit dependent on that. Someone was asking about free books. I just always plug this website just because I like this website a lot. It's called Unite for Literacy. I think maybe the biggest thing about it is it's completely free. It is, you go to the website, it takes you to books right away. You don't log in, you don't give them a username, you don't have to give them an email, you don't have to give them a credit card. You just go there and there's books. And then they have books in Spanish or English or Ukrainian, and they can be narrated in a ton of different languages. So we'll check it out super quick. I think at minimum, my pre-K kids, my kindergarten kids, my first grade kids, I'm gonna tell parents, like, hey, when you're reading at home, if you don't have books or if you want to hear something in your home language or something like that, you might look at this website. So I picked, let's do just Spanish here. So I don't know. Let's do Small and Mighty Mammals. And so I don't know exactly if this is going to work for you, so let's try. I could have it read to me in English.
Small mammals can be mighty powerful. For example, raccoons are super burglars. They can open locks and undo knots to find food.
And then I can have it read to me in Spanish.
Los mamíferos pequeños pueden ser poderosos. Por ejemplo, los mapaches son súper ladrones. Pueden abrir cerraduras y deshacer nudos para encontrar comida.
And then when there's an eyeball, you can click on it and see it in that language too. So I could also.
Los mamíferos pequeños pueden ser poderosos. Por ejemplo, los mapaches son súper ladrones. Pueden abrir cerraduras y deshacer nudos para encontrar comida.
And then I can go back to English. So, oops, I did stop share. That was a wrong button. All right. Did that work? Were you able to hear the audio? You couldn't hear the audio? Oh, you could hear the audio. Okay, good. All right. Anyway, that's called Unite for Literacy. Basically, I just think it's a great website, especially for younger kids. Probably, I say to second, but I bet by second grade they're a little bit kind of thinking these books are for little kids and I don't want it. But definitely pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. Hey, mom and dad, check out this website. Books right away. Books in English. And I didn't show you completely, but the little pencil thing, you could pick different text, so you could get Spanish books or Ukrainian books, and then the globe icon, you could have all these different narrations. And like you heard, the narration is done from native speakers, not robotic translation, but actual people who narrated it. All right. All right. So vocabulary is really up on the language comprehension side of reading, or the top part of the rope. But letters would say like, hey, once you've cracked the code, the next important thing is knowing the meaning of words. And so really vocabulary instruction is super important. A couple sort of tips here. One is Isabella Beck and her colleague, someone McCown, I don't know her name, Beck and McCown, they're big vocabulary people. And so they're kind of like saying, hey, 400 words a year need to be like explicitly taught. Kids need like 10 exposures to each of these words. They need to do it in listening, and their speaking, and their reading, and their writing. You should maybe teach explicitly 3 to 5 words for every reading selection we do. Sidlets kind of has instructional practices for English learners. They talk about pre-teaching a couple vocabulary words. The big thing is I don't pre-teach every word that I'm going to use. I don't even want to go over 5 words. If you're even at 5, you might be too many. Kids are just they'll listen to a couple words, but pretty quickly you're going on. It's taking up too much of the lesson pre-teaching this vocabulary, and after a couple words, it's not really worth it. So trying to pick, as a classroom teacher, as a content teacher, what are 3 words that I'm going to say a lot in this lesson that you really have to know in order to get anything out of this lesson, and I'm going to pre-teach these words. So today we're going to be talking about a conflict, and this is a conflict, and here's my visual for conflict, and this is exactly what this word means, and then I'm going to post it on the wall. And then you're also going to need to know the word whatever, right? Canal or something like that. And this is what a canal is. And so then as I give instruction, every time I say conflict, I maybe am gesturing to my visual of remember. And so there was a conflict and I point to that visual. Or, when they were traveling down the canal and I'm pointing to that word canal. So I'm picking what are the 3 big words I'm going to be saying a lot. I'm pre-teaching them with a visual. It's posted. And then as I teach, I refer to those visuals. So again, she's kind of saying, how do I pick my words? Critical for understanding text, likely to be found in other readings, difficult to learn without explicit instruction. Sometimes it's worth thinking about, mostly teachers teach tier 3. Tier 3 would be content specific words, and they're oftenly explicitly taught. And just kind of encouraging teachers to also teach some tier 2 words, which would be academic words that are usually not part of social everyday language, but are used across different content areas. So to be like, ooh, hey, we're going to do a summary. We're going to summarize. Let's talk about what does it mean to summarize something. So if I pick that as my word, I'm teaching a tier 2 word. And then multilingual learners, especially our newcomers, occasionally they're going to need some help even with tier 1, sort of everyday, more common, high frequency words. Kind of being like, hey, I'm not sure that you've ever, know what a forest is, and so I might assume you know what a forest is, but because you're an English learner, I'm not sure you know this. Where I'm going to teach this explicitly to you. All right. This is just a point and talk. Basically, as I teach, I point to those visuals. And then I'm gonna leave you with this. This will be our last little thing. I love how Katie Topple does her little vocabulary thing. So we're gonna do this real quick. Oh,
Don't necessarily
let me optimize.
know what that word is. The next part we want to talk about is vocabulary instruction. And this is something, I'm like the vocabulary lady at my school. One key thing I learned is teach the vocabulary root word by itself, not with an ending, but then also show examples of the word with different endings. So I might teach the word accomplish, that's the base word or the root word, but I want to also show that I can add different endings and it could become accomplishing or accomplished. When we teach vocabulary in this way and show the different variations, we have an opportunity to embed instruction in prefixes, suffixes, teaching plurals, teaching different verb tenses, identifying different parts of speech, because I color code. The red words are nouns, the green words are verbs, the orange words are adjectives. And I always do the endings in black so that they stand out. You can see the base word plus the ending. This gives students an opportunity to learn about semantics and how we would use accomplish differently in a sentence than accomplishing or accomplished. It gives them metacognitive awareness for determining the word meanings, that when they understand ing means that somebody is doing that action word right now compared to ed that they already did it. And it also teaches them spelling rules that we might call out and we teach that when we make something plural, we add s, but then we get into some different words. So if we had the word family, we would show them specifically how we change families. We drop the y and we add ies. So all of that instruction can be embedded within our explicit vocabulary instruction. And it's an opportunity to kind of cyclically review some of those grammar pieces so that we're not necessarily doing isolated grammar lessons, but embedding it in the rich content that we're learning about and reviewing it all of the time. I also love to use.
All right. I basically,
don't necessarily know what that word is.
I basically just love, this is so fuzzy, but I just liked her idea of when I have a vocabulary word, I want to teach kind of the base word form of it, and I want to show other variations of this word. So, hey, today's vocabulary word is discriminate. This is what it means, but you're also going to see discriminated. You might see discrimination, discriminating, and I'm going to show these forms, and I'm going to talk about how are these words different. How is discrimination different than discriminated? And so I like this idea of kind of to Dr. Tate's point earlier of getting into like morphology and really talking about how does this change the word? What are the different forms of this word? And then to her point again, to Katie Topple's point of then we're doing this in a more meaningful way. We're not doing like this isolated lesson about suffixes or prefixes, but we're kind of revisiting, hey, we've learned about this before. Let's talk about it again. And you're going to see these words in the text we're looking at today. Let's be really clear about it. I also like her color coding of the power, I guess is the noun. And then when you have full, then it's becoming an adjective. So powerful or scribble. It could be a scribble, like, hey, you made a scribble on the table, or it could be like, hey, a verb, you're going to scribble on your paper. So it could be either that word's tricky, it could be a noun or a verb, depending on the sentence. So again, I like pre-teaching just a few words, and then I have a visual representation. I'm explicit about the meaning. I'm showing how else might you see this word and what do these different variations mean for the word. Anyway, just something I liked that teachers might consider doing if they're not doing it already. Just some resources. National Committee for Effective Literacy has a great guide called the Comprehensive Literacy Instruction for English Learners. The IES, Institute for Educational Services, has sort of these effective literacy practices for kids in elementary grades. There's also one for kids in secondary grades. There's a joint statement from the Reading League and NCEL, which is National Committee for Effective Literacy, that's all about multilingual learners and signs of reading. And then, to Cammie's point, DESE literacy initiatives. You'll find lots of guidance from DESE and resources from DESE about literacy instruction and sort of expectations and resources that can be used statewide. I hope you got something out of today. Again, my name is Rob. I did go a little bit long, I think, by accident, but thanks for attending and thanks for participating and I hope this was helpful. And reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk about any of this. And Lauren Chadwick, send me that article you mentioned. I want to see an article.
I put it in the chat. I'm in the note taker.
Thank you, Dr. Tate. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone else.
Thank you, Rob.